2020. Election madness. Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. With your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Today's intro music. Midnight in the House of Yin and Yang by D-Day-Z. Wow, I butchered that. Catastrophic Caucuses. Iowa kicks off the 2020 election craziness with a big old clusterfuck of fail. Thank you for tuning in. I am your eccentric host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. That track, Midnight in the House of Yin and Yang, was DJ Z featuring Purple Mush and the Political Outrage, which is, of course, just basically me pushing buttons on my iPad. But I digress. I hope you enjoyed that very danceable, funky track of looped digital electronic noises, some of which I made up, some of which I borrowed, all of which I pushed little buttons on my picture screen to mix together. I am your humble host, your political satirist, your cannabis spiritual mystic, your almost daily opinion talk show host, and I'm here this morning really excited about yesterday's events. How many of you, dear friends and listeners, even knew about the Iowa caucuses? Right? Raise your hands. Okay. I did, but did I understand what they were? Hell no. Not going to pretend that I did. I had to do a little bit of digging. And I had to do a lot of paying attention. Now, in general, I kind of sort of understood because, that word is a mainstay in Trumptopian and American politics, going way back into the ancient history of this prideful thing we call the United States. The Caucuses are actually two things in one. Caucuses definition, let's check it out. Google, pulling from one of the dictionary websites, I'm not sure which, defines a caucus as a plural noun. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just indicating how to spell the plural noun. Plural noun caucuses. One, in some U.S. states, because it's not It's not 100% all the way across the country. In some U.S. states, a meeting at which local members of a political party register their preference among candidates running for office or selected delegates to attend a convention. Definition 2, a conference of members of a legislative body who belong to a particular party or faction. Verbs is the third person caucuses, to hold or form a legislative caucus. To caucus, right? You can belong to a caucus, like I'm fairly certain everyone's heard. There's like the Black Congressional Caucus, right? There's also, anybody who really watches politics knows that there's different subgroups that are not official committees, that are not official bodies of legislation in the federal Senate and House of Representatives, and they call themselves the caucus of such and such, okay? So that's like the identity use of the word. We belong to said caucus. But then there's like the action, right? The process by which members of a political party register their preference. Now, that doesn't really explain it. And yesterday, the evil and corrupt media overlords of cable TV news had a beautiful opportunity to really dig deep and give us on-the-ground comprehension of what caucuses are in action. Like, how do they really function? And it's hilarious if you think about it, because it's a throwback to a ye olde ancient time before Trumptopia, before apostrophe Murica, before even, USA, back when this political space was struggling to shape itself, and there was no such thing as a telegraph or a telephone or satellite communications. And a quick rundown. I could get all formal and go over to Wiki and give you what it says. Let's see what it. Let's find caucuses on Wikipedia. But I'll give you a quick rundown off the top of my head. Basically, especially as featured in Iowa last night, groups of people in very small pockets demographically in different regions of the state, different, not quite counties, what were they called? Excuse me. They're not committees, they are not regions. Man, I had this word at the tip of my tongue yesterday. At any rate, let's say it's county by county, right? People gather at a local high school, a local community center, any place where there's a room large enough to have a capacity of like 300 to 600 people. And sometimes it's as few as a couple hundred. Sometimes it's as few as 150. But these people, real life people, everyday average Joe Schmo people, and in Iowa, that's 90% white, Caucasian, suburban, agriculture, red collar, blue collar types. And I'm not judging, I'm just pointing out the statistical facts. They gather and they literally hokey pokey in a room and yell and scream and engage in one of my favorite activities of political ridiculousness, mindless chants. Fill in your words. Say what you mean. Just the crazy, USA. But they're doing it for their preferred political candidate. And then this group of people, instead of, everyone's slightly more familiar with a primary or with plain old regular old-fashioned voting. And while technically you can say that when you go to caucus, when you go to participate in caucusing, when you are yourself busy caucusinating, I just made up that conjugation, you are, quote, voting, but you're not doing it in the typical sort of, voting machine in a voting booth with a little curtain kind of way. You're literally voting with your body. You're standing in a designated roped off or cordoned or taped off little area, usually in, spread out all over the gymnasium or whatever big room this group is gathered in. And mind you, this happens when you have a caucus, when a state holds its state caucus, especially like this, Iowa, first in the nation. They go to their corners and they line up under the banner of their preferred politician. So all the Joe Biden supporters lump together in a Joe Biden lump, and they chant their pro-Joe Biden, mine less chance, mine less chance. And, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a 3-part process, really quick here. As far as how Iowa was operated yesterday, they break it down like this. There's the initial choice or first alignment, which is really interesting terminology. I like alignment. Alignment is very significant in spiritual terms, and in political terms, it's mostly meaningless. But they have the first alignment, which basically means everyone run to the corner you want to stand in, right? If you support Buttigieg, go stand in the Buttigieg corner. If you support Warren or Sanders, etc., etc., etc. So people go and they stand in their groups and they chant their mindless chants in support of their political puppets. And then not the committee, gosh darn it, the division, is it division? No. Sector? No, that's not the word. I'm still trying to remember this word. And I'm trying to see if in somewhere there's a references to it, but there's these officers, right? There's volunteers, mind you. This is all a volunteer effort because voting in America is, I think, very appropriately not yet completely co-opted by corporate efforts. Although there's a lot of grumble, complaint about how, because voting in America is purely or at the organizational level, at the state-to-state organization level, a volunteer effort, that there's a lot of room for mishigas and craziness and obviously, interference on many levels. And we can get into that in a future episode of this new specialty segment, 2020 Election Madness. Because, there's still a lot to be discussed about electoral meddling from external forces. Not that I'm claiming to be an expert, but obviously I have my opinions on what may or may not have gone down. But we'll put a pin in that, come back to it. So, at these precincts, that's the word. Thank you, Wikipedia. You finally brought my eye to that word. At these different precincts, and there's hundreds, if not thousands of them across a state like Iowa, these little clusters of people in the 100 or 200 range at these individual precincts, they do this thing, they line up, they chant the chants, and the first alignment is sort of like an elimination round, right? There's a threshold that must be met. And I believe, if memory serves from last night's pontificating about it on the cable channel news, you have to meet a 15% threshold. Now, that's 15% of the people participating in your given precinct. So if you're at a precinct, and mind you, this is what's admirable about this, if I might interject. Some people were talking about this on the news last night, and I totally agree. What is somewhat like old-timey, novel, in that it is kind of interesting and weird, not that it's in a book, kind of romantic about it. What's the thing that's kind of cool in an oldie-timey, old-school, pre-technology kind of way, is that it forces the people who are willing to participate, because at the meta level, participation rates are still lower than at the general election, right? And participation rates generally fluctuate up and down, and haven't seen record turnout in quite some time. And that's something that was a whole nother issue of discussion leading up to yesterday's landmark race inaugural. It's the first big event that really says, okay, the race for the White House is on, right? They expected huge turnout, and they kind of got middle of the road average turnout. That, if I remember correctly, landed somewhere in between the most recent record-breaking turnout in Iowa, which I believe was 20, and the sort of higher than average, but not really record-breaking turnout from 2018. But I digress. I could have gotten those dates wrong. My point is, they were expecting huge turnout, and they got okay turnout. And so at any given precinct, I had to look back at Wikipedia. At any given precinct, your preferred nominee, let's say you were really into Yang, right? I hadn't mentioned him yet, so I gotta make sure I say his name. By the way, as a total tangent, I would be intrigued to see a Warren Yang ticket or a Sanders Yang ticket. Not that I'm discounting Yang as a top of the ticket guy. I just think that there's a lot of things mitigating against him in terms of, the tolerances of the American electorate. But we can do a whole episode about individual candidates and interesting would-be running mate combinations down the road here in a minute. But so let's say you're supporting Yang, and you're there, you're rallying behind your precinct captain for Yang. Each nominee has precinct captains, the boots on the ground that are trying to organize the community to show up to this crazy thing late on a Monday morning, which usually requires people to take time off of work, et cetera, right? You got to get a babysitter, you got to drag your kids along, one of the two, and it's as many pundits pointed out, and it wouldn't be the first time, it's, in the modern context, it's sort of like the most undemocratic thing that we do during a presidential election cycle, but we can debate that later. So you get behind your precinct captain for Yang, and then there's a period of time allotted for all the free-floating individuals to be who haven't declared yet to be like, all right, well, which group am I going to lump into? And here's one of the reasons why it's a little undemocratic. Think about it. And now, while it's great and romantic and sort of folksy and really, grassroots for people to be mingling with their fellow compatriots, members of their own community, and speaking with each other without violence, without anger, without ridicule, without trolling each other about who they should support on the ticket, that's kind of cool. Because we need more of that. We need more communion, right? We need more communication in this world. So that part's cool. But the other part, the downside, which is part and parcel, is that in such a setup, there's plenty of room for bullying, for pressure tactics, for what they love to call horse trading. And that's very undemocratic. The purists who think that everything should be a primary often talk about the God-given right to a secret ballot, to choosing for yourself based on all the propaganda without any of your neighbors settling up to you and trying to guilt you or charm you or pressure you into supporting someone else. Now, another part that's sort of like a wild card throw of the dice with this process is that, let's say, as I think may have been the case, I'm not sure because none of the final numbers came out last night, by the way. For those of you who didn't pay any attention at all, which is why I do this, because, who's got the time? But if you're listening to my show, you're going to get an earful of the process and what's going on and some, opinion-based updates on some of the events. So here's what happened last night. All of this is going on. Now, let me finish walking through my walkthrough here, right? And you have your candidate vis-a-vis bodies in a lump standing behind a sign has to meet a threshold. And if you don't meet that 15% threshold, then your candidate is judged as not viable. And that's one of those mysterious things, electability. So there's a lot of chanting, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of, hey, come on, come over here. And sometimes it really kind of, from some of the live shots that we got before the whole breaking down of the delivery of results happened, it's kind of like a big, giant political Red Rover, bring so-and-so on over kind of game. It's like the groups start deploying tactics to either poach members from other political support base, of other candidates, or to defend their base and not let their members get poached by another candidate. And there's all this psychological strategery about waiting it out, making sure that even though you might not be at your group might not be at the threshold yet, you want to stay active and keep recruiting from those who get eliminated early in the first alignment. And there's nuances, and there's a whole bunch of, as plenty of the pundits said yesterday, unnecessarily complicated rules. But I digress. There's the first alignment, and then anybody whose group isn't big enough, who doesn't meet 15% of the total number of participants at that precinct, that name gets eliminated from the room, right? And all those bodies have to then mingle and get seduced to another group. Now, they could all lump together into a power block of undecided, uncommitted voters. And then there's this whole other thing that can happen, which we didn't really get to see a lot of last night, because right around the time, I want to say 8:30, 9 o'clock Pacific time, which is the time zone I'm watching from, or getting on late in the evening, 11 o'clock-ish, we're normally expecting to get the early results, the early numbers. The first alignment went like this, and then the second alignment seems to be lining up like this, and we'll get the final numbers in the next 20 minutes. There was total silence from the IDP, the Iowa Democratic Party. Right? And right around the same time, there was a lot of reporting, speculative reporting, based on the publicly available or publicly reported numbers, because it's not like a secret ballot. You don't go in a little room and pull a lever. You stand around and the precinct captains from each team will shout numbers, and like I said, people try to trade and barter to build connections. And then there's the wild card of your second choice, right? That skews everything. So anybody who's caucusing, whose preferred first choice doesn't make the threshold, has to either then make a decision, do a little soul searching, do a little bit of oh God, I don't know, who else should I vote for now? Or they come in prepared with a first choice, second choice, and sometimes even a third choice dynamic predetermined in their head. And that's really random, because there's often, very personal, quirky reasons why one would pick Biden as their first choice and, Warren as their second, or vice versa. It's bizarre. And there's no way to predict that. So it's a huge, wild card, extra pair of dice being thrown. But what the fascinating part about last night's series of events, and let me throw in this one key thing, for the first time in caucusing history, there was an app for it. And late in the evening, late in the evening, because I was about to turn the whole thing off, because I was like, this is silly, and I get it. Okay, I've learned a lot about how caucusing works. I've also learned a lot about how Iowans see themselves in the political process, and I learned a lot about how the pundits feel about Iowa, because there was a lot of just the results are being delayed for an undetermined amount of time. Let's interview Billy Bob Schmob over there, and let's talk about the process, and let's debate about whether or not Iowa should be number one in the nation during the formal official race to November. And there was a lot of like spinning of wheels and empty sort of hang time with pundits sort of looking at each other like, well, we have nothing to report to you. There's no data coming in. So for the first time in American caucus history, in an effort to be exceptionally more transparent than ever before, and to be, hip with the new technology of the times, there was a freaking app. And the late-breaking reporting late at night because things got interesting, right? And I was saying I was going to think about maybe turning it off, but then the more the delay dragged on and the more it was evident that it wasn't just a regular delay, it wasn't just a little bit of like, oh, now the numbers are trickling in. Because usually you start getting like 15% of precincts have reported, and here's the breakdown of all those precincts that are in that 15%. Then you get an update a little bit later, and it's like 30% of precincts have reported. Here's what the new... None of that was happening. And so it just got weirder and weirder. And I was scanning through all the different channels, and like the BBC was analyzing the analysis of all the American channels, and it got really meta for a hot second there. I was fascinated, like, okay, despite the fact that I'm tired and I really should get to sleep, I'm going to stay up and see what I can see. So the late-breaking reporting, right before, as a matter of fact, I was like done with it when I was like 4 hours later, everyone had given their speech. It was fascinating. The one, I guess, silver lining of the debacle was that everybody except Yang, I think. I didn't see Yang, and now that was a failure of this institutional media, or he just was like, fuck it, I'm not giving a speech right now. Maybe he was the one that was going to be like, I'm going to be the holdout, I'm going to be the protest speaker. Who knows? I'm speculating there. But everyone at some point just dropped their victory speech with the, modulated language to be like, well, we're going to find out, but my campaign, we feel really strongly, blah, 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 blah. So everyone got to give their speech, and then, wheels up to, what was it, New Hampshire? I think it's New Hampshire they're going to next. If I'm wrong, forgive me. Right? So after all that took up a good, I think it was like 45 minutes, almost a whole hour and 20 of listening to everybody speak back to back. And if I remember the order, it was Klobuchar, Biden, Buttigieg, and Warren. I might have some of those not quite in the right order. And then I don't remember seeing Yang. And Sanders spoke. He might have been right after Biden. Anyways, I don't know who else was officially participating in the caucuses. I know that Bloomberg wasn't technically participating in the caucuses. Let me get to this late-breaking reporting. Here's the late-breaking reporting. The end of the night, it comes out, after many weird press releases, which I'll talk about in a second, it comes out that this app that had been deployed by the Iowa Democratic Party it was privately developed and privately deployed, like it was just an epic fail, right? It didn't download correctly for many people. For other people, precinct chairs were reporting that they were afraid to initialize it because upon downloading it, there was like a creepy warning, and one of the political pundits read it on the air, like it's the last thing I saw, some sort of warning officially associated with this official democracy caucus precinct captain number reporting app. I don't know what it was called because it was all privately, it was all in-house. It wasn't like, it's not available on Google Apps or on the Apple Store. But there was a warning that would come up as you were downloading it or as you were initiating the install, which is like, apps like these can cause damage to your device. Are you sure you want to continue using this APK? It's like, that's going to scare the living shit out of anybody over 30, right? That isn't like, whatever, I'll just click this anyways. Or anybody that's just like relatively not tech savvy, which, quite frankly, while there's a huge influx of young people participating in the political process and a massive influx of women participating in the political process, there's still a lot of old, fragile white dudes, right? No offense, fragile white dudes, but there's still a lot of older people. And no offense to older people, but as we all know, older people can sometimes be really gung-ho about technology, but they can also be a little bit intimidated by it. There's nothing wrong with that. As I have gotten older, I have noticed that happen to me. I'm just not going to click on that because that's, I've gotten a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more, some people say wise or savvy about stuff, but other people are a little paranoid about technology and apps and, using things on my little tiny supercomputer phone device. I digress. What is my point? It was a fascinating evening of things not going as expected. Nothing went according to plan. Right? Now, I have yet to really check in this morning to see if any results have come out. And I'm going to do that a little bit later. I'm going to have a follow-up episode about the catastrophic caucuses or cauci. Oh, man, no, that's a brutal way to conjugate it, right? Is it octopus or octopi? Scientifically speaking, it's octopi. So is it caucuses or caucusi? Yeah, let's stick with caucuses. Okay, so my politics news page just all updated, and so none of the headlines I had spotted for giving a little bit of shouts out to are still there. Okay, but here's ABC News headline about last night from 43 minutes ago. Iowa's coveted status in doubt following results delay. Right? It was a clusterfuck. And the harshest words spoken or written or distributed last night about the caucuses came from the Joe Biden camp. The two attorneys, the two top legal lawyers, the two representatives, the two lawyers from the Biden campaign published a pretty strongly worded letter to the IDP just before everyone just broke down and gave their exit speeches, right? Everyone was trying to be a good chap and wait and see if the results came out in their favor or not so they can get a definitive political photo moment of, I am the victor in Iowa. I get the most virtual delegates, right? Here's the other thing, right? The thing that the caucuses are about, it's not a straight vote. It's a sort of simulation of the delegate acquisition process. As it's sort of like they're trying to get to numbers that will render mathematically what they call the state delegate equivalent or equivalency, which is, electoral college bullshit. But we're going to put a pin in that because there's a lot to talk about with the electoral college. Never mind what happened in 2016. Just in general, the debate, which is more democratic, a straight up and down popular vote for the most number of American people behind you, or this mitigated, supposed to be counterbalanced for equality, which probably isn't, and is probably inherently sort of prejudicial and maybe even a little bit inherently racist, especially once you start talking about delegate map redistricting and redlining and all that crap. But like I said, we're going to put a pin in that and come back to another episode for that. So the delegate thing is their goal, right? At the end of the night, one candidate should have been able to say, I won the popular vote. I was number one choice. And that same candidate and or another one gets to say, I got the strongest number of delegates out of this process, which means that in the other caucuses, because there aren't very many, to the best of my understanding, I think there's 5 national statewide caucuses in this process, and they all get lumped together, right? Isn't that what Super Tuesday is? Something like that. No, I think Super Tuesday is the first round of legit straight primaries. I forget. We'll look into it. But my point is, they all wanted that, right? They all wanted that glorious moment of, aha! The people of Iowa all lumped together in a big sweaty gym for me. And, someone else and or myself gets X many delegates. Virtual ones to be able to tout that strength, that, quote, mysterious electability. So it was fascinating, right? That didn't get to happen. Instead of one or two people giving victory speeches and the rest giving concession speeches and redirecting their whole angular momentum of what they're going to talk about and how they're going to approach the next set of events, everyone got to fire off, almost everyone. And I am curious to see if there's any discussion about what Yang, whether that was a choice or whether he was just, fuck it, I'm going to go to the next event, and he just didn't know that anyone was going to give a speech and therefore missed the opportunity. Who knows, right? I don't know why Yang didn't seem to give a speech. I'll see if I can dig into it today. But there's one headline from AV Club, Audiovisual Club, which is a publication I've never heard of, or at least I don't recognize, but they sound kind of cool in as much as the wording on this is neat. Prayers for this Iowa caucus official and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad night. And I don't know which one they're talking about, but there was an interesting, real life moment of candid, behind the scenes looking into it that played out, I think, on MSNBC, because some precinct captain from some precinct somewhere in Iowa got on the phone. Yeah, it had to have been on MSNBC because, if I remember correctly, he was talking to Rachel Maddow at the time and her panel of talking heads covering the event. And he disclosed some interesting facts that actually contradicted the official statements released by the IDP during the worst of the delay drama. The IDP released, I think, a series of 3, if I'm not mistaken, press releases, all of which basically didn't say anything other than the obvious. There's been a delay. And then they attributed it to quality assurance checks and or problems with their quality assurance check system. And they asserted very forcefully in either the second or the third press release statement that, quote, this is not a hack or an intrusion. When any body of, not any body, but when a body or a working, sub department of the Democratic National Convention, which is the actual name we should use as opposed to the GOP, right? It's the Grand Old Party. That's the name of the Republican Party, and so that's why we call them the GOP. And the proper acronym for the Democrats is not the Dems, it's the DNC, right? The Democratic National Convention. The IDP, the Iowa, whenever any of the Democratic Party convention bodies deny a thing, I get a little suspicious because they have a pretty bad track record on that. But we'll let that sit for now. The IDP was very forceful in its statement that this is not a hack, this is not an intrusion. Now, the guy on the phone, the precinct captain on the phone, he didn't say this was a hack, but he did contradict the idea that there was nothing wrong with the app. Oh, I should have said that first. In all 3 of the statements, they somehow or another, the IDP, stated that this was not a problem with the app. The app didn't, quote, go down. That was an actual quote from them. The app didn't go down. I should probably look up their statements so I don't just make things up, right? But let's see. IDP press releases 2020 Iowa caucuses. Let's see if we get a good... We got some video. We got some live updates from Washington Post. Okay, we got... Oh, here's the IowaDemocrats.org press releases. Well, it might take a bit to find them all. But we'll see if we can dig them up. Anyways, in the reporting last night, and I was flipping around. I was trying to catch all the different news cable stations that I got. Which, by the way, whenever I talk about watching things on TV, I know that I'm pretty heavy-handed about the MSNBC and the CNN and the Fox News. But I also pay attention to Newsy, which is a relatively new station. The even newer and goofier sounding to me, Cheddar. Who picks a food name for a news station? Like, seriously, guys? Like, what? That just makes me feel either like the munchies are coming on or a little gross because you're all covered in cheese. I don't know. Or, meh, meh, ain't you a bit cheesy, right? I just get into a cheesy place of like, I can't take you seriously. Your name is so cheesy, it's literally a cheese. I digress. There's also, there's a couple of other relatively obscure, in that most people will be like, what news station is that? Not J News, but there's definitely an Israeli, I-24, which is out of Israel. Very sort of, it's like Fox News in that it really pats itself on the back for being fair and unbiased about all things Israel and Palestine. But when you watch it, it's pretty obviously, no offense here, I'm not trying to be rude, but it's pretty obviously pro-Israel and not so pro-Palestine. I mean, it's not overtly hating on the Palestinian issue, but it's definitely like, well, Israel is better. But I digress. There's also another one, Spectrum News 1, which is, I think, barely a year and a half old. And it's sort of like the native default news channel that's quote-unquote hyper-local to Southern California, LA, Orange County, and Riverside, which is my stomping grounds. And it's the default channel on my cable system. So every time I turn on the TV, instead of being on the channel I left it on last, it's on Spectrum News 1. And right, if there's any other news channels out there, and I also try to scan through the local news, but that's also usually mostly car chases, shootings, and, human interest stories about pets. So, and Little League. It's not often, and whenever they do go to national issues, they're usually just regurgitating the talking points of their parent station, etc. I digress. What is my point? My point is, last night caucuses, as the Biden camp very correctly pointed out, was epic failure. That was their words. I would say an epic clusterfuck of fail. We should have gotten results. We should have gotten them efficiently and in a cool, awesome, data-driven graphics and infographics on the fly kind of way, and we totally didn't. We sort of did in terms of the fact that the entry pollsters, and really the question has haunted me ever since I heard someone asked it. Have you ever met a pollster? I haven't. So if anybody out there listening is officially a professional pollster, open door invitation, come on the show. But I digress. So the entry polling, right? Not the official caucusing, but the polling of people as they arrived at select, quote, representative, what were they called? For crying out loud. Precincts. That was rendering some cool data. Now, that was handled by pollsters, and whatever systems they used, they worked without a hitch. And I want to wrap up this episode with the most interesting bit of data from those entry-level pollsters or arrival pollsters polling, and that's this. Because I think that setting aside all the other critique And I feel bad for Iowa, by the way. They got really shit canned. As soon as the delay crossed the hour and a half mark, everybody on every news station I flipped through was shit canning Iowa in as polite a way as possible. Basically asking, why do you guys get to be first in the nation when you're A, demographically not representative of the country, B, cling to an antiquated yet slightly romantic, because it makes you talk to your neighbors kind of thing, but definitely confusing, unnecessarily complicated methodology of nominating fake, it's not the actual electoral college delegates, but it's some sort of, sim virtual mock-up of that no one else in the country gets or really appreciates very much, or very few people. Now, some people think this is great. Some people think this is the epitome of real democracy because of the face-to-face nature of it, because you're in a group and you're dealing with other groups that oppose you, and y'all got to get along, right? Like, we can talk about that at length, but I digress. The most interesting fact, the most interesting data point that did get registered in some pseudoscientific way last night, which I hope is indicative of how things will go moving forward between now and November. And it was this: the most fundamental of demographics. The pollsters surveyed everyone coming in, and there's a lot of cool breakdowns that you can dig up from these entry polls, but the one that I want to highlight and end the show with today is this. 42% of participants were male, 58% of participants were female. Hashtag Goddess Rising. Hashtag Women's March right into the fucking Capitol, right? Am I a feminist? I don't know. Actual female feminists might say that I'm not. Am I a supporter, an ally, an admirer, a lover of, addicted to, and wholeheartedly, genuinely, wanting for there to be equality with women? Yes. Does that make me a feminist? I don't know. I'm anti-identity label politics, so fuck it. I'm a cybernetic artificial life form clone hybrid from the future sent here to warn you about the robots you all are making that are about to try to enslave you in an undetermined variable period of time in the not too distant future, because it's my very distant past. But I digress. When it comes to the human species, I'm it's all of us or none of us kind of guy, right? Like, either we all have human rights or none of us have human rights. Either we all get equality or none of us get equality. And I'm not an absolutist, but that's the one place where I draw an absolutist line. But I digress. I think that factoid, 58% women. I don't know if that's a record in Iowa for the caucuses or not. That's something we should look into, right? Like, and I'll see if I can pull that data from some source myself for a future episode. But the important part, given that this is not a research show, but an opinion show, is that if that number is real, because I don't know, dude, I wasn't there. I didn't do the polling myself. I didn't crunch the numbers. But assuming, because it was consistently reported throughout from all the different stations, so it's not like they were trying to pull some shenanigans on that number, at least. But if that number is valid and real, I got my fingers crossed, and I'm going to be praying some prayers to Pachamama and Gaia and Mother Earth, that means that between now and November, it's going to become overwhelmingly obvious that women are going to powerfully outnumber men in this ridiculous political process of electing the next president. Okay, and there's a lot more to talk about, but this segment has gone on long enough. As always, dear friends, I am humble and grateful and dedicated to trying to be goofy and entertaining, but also not fake news, right? If I ever get called out for being a fake newser, and then I will radically make sure to update whatever information I was wrong about. And again, I'm not pretending to be a source of news. I'm just commenting on the news, right? And I am grateful, full of gratitude that y'all are tuning in. Many thanks to all you listeners from around the world, literally from Spain to... Oh, wait, I had this pulled up. Where are you? We've got listeners tuning in to the Almost Daily Zencast, Good Morning Trumptopia, News Breaking News, and all the other various subsegments from the United Kingdom, Cyprus, Canada, Spain, Puerto Rico, Germany, Netherlands, New Zealand, Australia, and a whole bunch more other countries that my analytics page won't show me. So it's always fun to look at that page and see how that list updates and adjusts and changes. And every once in a while, there's a little spike in a new country, and more listeners seem to be tuning in from other places. But much love and gratitude being broadcast to you guys for tuning in. And yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's keep our thinking caps on nice and tight, right? And let's keep our mildly sarcastic, mildly jaded discernment up and working. Because as I've said before, and I'll have to say it again, I'm not blindly supporting any political puppet, right? My personal opinion is we don't need politics. We need civic organization. We need healthcare. We need housing for the homeless. We need healing for the sick. We need food for the hungry. We don't need politics. And whoa, stay tuned for the episode of Good Morning Trumptopia coming up in just a bit, because I'm going to open up with a statement about that and a look at how much money is being wasted. But for now, signing off, I am your robot from the future, cannabis mystic, political satirist, talk show host. Wow, I don't know why I said host. Always raw, always real, always unscripted. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. best quote from last night. Van Jones. And I quote him, "I just think that the idea of the caucus itself has failed to meet the viability threshold." That tickled me pink, and I think he's right. Despite the cool, charming, romantical things about it, real people really in a room together, really hashing out their differences within their own political party, that's cool. We need more of that. But as a methodology of determining who should be on the ticket, it's not working. And to back up that statement, I think he's right, man. Out of curiosity, because I didn't do it in the middle of the show, I was like, I better go to the official IDP website and see what's up. I clicked on, so you get to the Iowa caucuses, and you look at the big orange button, View Caucus Results. Boom! 0% reporting, 0 of 1,765 precincts are in. The candidates and everything is 0, right? 0, 0, 0. Bennett, Biden, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, Delaney, Gabbard, Klobuchar, Patrick, Sanders, Steyer, Warren, Yang, other uncommitted, all zeros. You look at the state, every county, 0. And then they have a huge breakdown, right? Of like every county and every precinct in the county. It's all 0.